Welcome to Antriksh Talks, where we meet interesting people and industry leaders to dissect terms and trends, brands and stories. Today we have a special guest with us, Preetham Venkky. He is currently the Chief Digital Officer at DDB Mudra Group, where he spearheads digital strategies for some of the world's most renowned brands. With over 20 years of experience in digital transformation, branding, and social media marketing, he has played pivotal and foundational roles for companies like 22 Feet Tribal Worldwide and KRDS, expanding their footprint globally.
Preetham, thank you for coming to our podcast. And it's been a pleasure and insightful session going through your LinkedIn posts as well, coming up, with ticking all the boxes across AI, digital transformation. And I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you during these interaction. And starting off, for me personally, it feels like you have a really cool title right now. You're the Chief Digital Officer, and the journey that you have spanned across different roles, across tech and marketing leadership roles. So, can you give me a quick recap of how the journey has been around the last few decades?
Yeah, I think few decades is the best way to summarize the journey. I started as early as about 98 when internet was very, very much in its infancy. And one of the things that I continue to focus on, to be honest, is to look at how a new pipeline called the internet, and at its core, it's nothing but a whole new distribution medium. What could you send over the pipe? In the early stages in 1999, I launched a very small startup back then. I was just about 20 odd years old. The focus was very simple. The focus was to create a content hub meant during the dial-up time. This wasn't a time where portals were very popular. We started building a content hub portal, what you would currently call as content marketing, or essentially a digital publication. And the focus was purely people in my age group, right? That means youth at that given point in time, and what were they interested in reading. I think the journey and the genesis of it all started there. But also, one of the things very interesting about technology and digital is that they tend to go hand in hand. Almost everything in digital has a technology amplification. That means whenever new technology comes in, everything around you that has the prefix called digital tends to change a whole lot. We've seen that from handheld digital cameras to now basically a camera being on your phone. So again, all those technology era jumps brings that effect onto anything that digital essentially touches. Because the pipeline continues to be what carries the digital bits, but what comes before the pipe tends to be where technology has the most important role to play. So across the ecosystem, there are three things that we have to look at. We have to look at technology that influences digital bits, digital and how those digital bits are enhanced, and lastly, the pipeline on which you would essentially send them. And of course, on the receiving end, the same thing takes place again. So the journey has been an evolution along with all of these three as a part of that ecosystem. That means when technology has evolved, down to how digital bits are recorded, down to how digital is essentially transferred over a pipe. But there are two other key moments that I think really shaped the way I think, to be honest, as far as perspective is concerned, is down to user empathy. And my first experience with user empathy was thanks to Apple. As a part of Catalyst Labs, my job was to actually evangelize Apple technology. So I worked very closely with the Apple team to figure out how do we take this really powerful technology and a whole new user experience altogether, and how do we bring that to the masses? Of course, at that given point in time, it was Mac. This was back in early 2007. Towards the end of 2007, the iPhone got launched. Now, iPhone was a natural way for people to adopt that technology. It was relatively simple. The user interface was double tap, zoom in, zoom out, tap, and so on and so forth, right? So it was very simple in terms of how the adoption was. But I have a feeling that Mac is where a larger part of the adoption needed to take place. And we've seen the evolution of the Mac as well on the back of user interface and user experience. So user empathy and how do you convert that empathy into interface and experience is one of the largest learnings I've had. And honestly, I continue to be a student of it.
Agreed. Yeah, user empathy seems to be the base of it all. As you said, technology and the digital bits can change and transform, but the basic ecosystem remains the same. And the dot-com era built on it, and of course, it was user-driven at the end of the day. So the same thing that we are observing to some extent in the AI era now, the technologies and the stack is changing. It's becoming more advanced, but the user remains the end recipient. So like, what are your views about how the AI era is different than what it was back in early 2000s?
I think Bill Gates looks at it from a slightly different perspective. He looks at it as an interface change, but I think it's a little bit more deeper than that. About a year back, my mode of thinking and my model of thinking was to say that this is how internet is going to operate, which is true. That's how internet will operate. Everything will have an AI middleware in some form or fashion. We've already seen that, by the way,
Okay.
happen in the last 15 odd years. The fact is that when you see a feed on your Instagram, when you see suggested videos on YouTube, even your Google search results are largely influenced by AI. So our interface with the
Right.
internet is already AI curated. So that means it was already part of the middleware. Now, of course, AI has got a whole new boost in its language usage because of generative AI, and that's a slightly different aspect of AI as compared to the normal curative AI that we have. So, generative AI is when you
Right.
have the ability to generate anything that you imagine, anything that you wish for it to get created. And so that's the new middleware in the creation side of things. So you've got two sides of the equation. You've got consumption on one end, you've got creation on one end. And I think to a large part in the last 15 years, we've perfected the consumption side of the middleware with AI curation. But now with AI creation, we're trying to create a middleware on the creation side of the equation. Now, what this does do is it democratizes creation. We've seen that happen with a lot
Right.
of tools. If you look at how Instagram was, along with the introduction of two new products, which is stories and reels, we've seen more users become creators. And I think what
Yeah.
Gen AI has the ability to do is actually generate more creators. Now, at one side of the equation, does that mean we generate more noise? No, I think it's just a question of whatever adoption there is, and there's always a market of 1,000 people for any kind of content that you create. And we just don't have that many creators who are creating content for a subset of 1,000 users. And I think what Gen AI allows you to do is amp up completely the creator ecosystem. And I think that's obviously fascinating. The way I look at it is that the earlier creation device has shifted. Like, for instance, even now, the largest creation device continues to be the laptop or the desktop or the Mac or the PC that you use. The fact is that there is more content getting created on phones than there is on desktop. But for a lot of times, when you have to focus on craft, you go back to the large models, which, the desktop or the PC that you have. By the way, here's an interesting insight. There are more videos created, correct, which are published where the actual editing software is Instagram or TikTok in this case than
Yeah.
Adobe, After Effects or Adobe Premiere. Most people don't realize that, but that's the power of bringing tools and democratizing them into something of a small form factor. I think Gen AI has the ability to accelerate it. So for me, my model is that it's a PC replacement or it's a PC adjacent, which means that the power of generative AI is essentially residing in the compute. That means, how we use traditional processors for compute, you now have the processor residing in the cloud somewhere. And what's happening is that the arithmetic and logic unit of the compute is now getting replaced with generative AI based compute. And I think that is the way we need to see the next 20 years pan out. So it's a shift as pivotal as a shift in the PC era. So that means, of course, when I say PC era, it shifts every other hardware. It's true for your iPads and tablets, it's true for your phone, as well as for your desktop and PC.
True, true. And when ChatGPT launched in like during end of 2022, people were like fascinated by it. But as you rightly said, AI already existed. But the Gen AI factor kind of amplified things and put a spotlight on the AI factor, and people felt empowered, as you rightly said. People can create a lot more. People can create with a lot less on their hands. So when you talk about the Gen AI factor, ChatGPT, which is OpenAI, was the clear winner during that time, and it is also being raised, by Meta, Google. So, what do you think the scene will look like in a decade? Like, do you see OpenAI as the clear winner?
It's too early. Which is why, back to the model, the way I've been thinking about it is it's in a way an adjacent or a replacement to the era of compute itself. So then I think the clear winner will be NVIDIA for sure, because they're miles ahead of the next closest competition, which is AMD. And if you look at what the founder has been talking about for quite a while right now, he's saying that our intent is to create compute. And not just compute, but an entire computing ecosystem. By creating that ecosystem, I think they will turn out to be the clear winners for sure, right? So that if I were to be a betting horse, I'd put some of my dollars, or at least 50% of my dollars, directly on that horse first, right? Now, the next is very, very unclear at the moment. It's a very, very nascent and early stage. I see this as early as the PC era went through in the early 80s or in the late 70s. So I don't think we are yet to see clear winners. And trying to bet on any of the other horses is going to be tricky. So I'd rather just distribute that betting across two or three horses. The way I would see that is that I'm a little bit of an underdog, so I prefer to bet on underdogs to a certain extent. They tend to work harder. So the models that I'm actually gunning after are models like what Anthropic is creating with Claude. I don't have too much confidence on Llama because I like the open source way. But just like during the PC era, there is a market for open source operating systems. If you remember, like your Linux and what Red Hat was doing with it, but I don't think they're going to become mainstay. I think mainstay is going to be where enterprise is going to sign up, and that's 80% of the market share between two leaders. Just the way we had Mac as one leader and you had Windows as another, I suspect it's going to be two leaders. Now, it's amongst three front runners at this point, which means you've got Gemini at one end, very, very late start, not really as proficient, but could have a very strong enterprise play. Otherwise, in the frontier model space, it seems to be a pretty good race between Anthropic's Claude and OpenAI's ChatGPT at the moment. So, and you know, what's really interesting about Anthropic is that every time ChatGPT comes up with something new, it just takes them 30 days to match it. So I see that as a pretty good head-on race at the moment. So it's just these three players that I'm betting on to a large extent. There could be a dark horse that comes in, but we'll have to see. There are no signs that there is a fifth or a sixth dark horse that's just going to appear out of nowhere. But again, all of this is on LLM models. I think there is an equal amount of competition taking place in GAN models when it comes to image and video generation. But it's finally going to be a play into two clear leaders where there's going to be a duopoly in enterprise consumption, and there will always be one clear winner on the open source model. I think that's why my modular thinking and my line of framework thinking has been in trying to call it as you can draw inspiration from what happened during the PC era and how that pans out. So we'll have to see how it pans out in the next 10 years.
Right. And talking about industry leaders, like what has been true for the PC era, there were clear winners after a couple of decades. There were top three industry leaders. The same we saw in the internet era, wherein we see Google and Meta, leading the charts in digital marketing and everything. So that, to some extent, has led to a certain monopoly as well as lack of transparency when it comes to using those platforms. So do you think even in the AI era, these top three or four companies that we see, they're going to establish their monopoly, and that can also lead to some sort of lack of transparency or lack of trust?
I don't know if lack of trust is an issue, but lack of transparency where there was always an issue around it. I think the politicians are getting right into it, the lawmakers are getting right into it and trying to solve some of those wrongs or some of those elements associated with lack of transparency. So that's one side of the equation. But let me touch upon why the future, anything to do with technology and the internet, is always going to be a duopoly. Reason is because of network effects. It continues to be a monopoly or duopoly because network effects ensures that adoption of a particular product happens at scale very, very rapidly. And every time there is more usage of a product, the product just gets better. Not just the experience, but the core product engine itself gets better. And that's even more accelerated with AI. Now, let's take a classic example of an internet company like Google Maps, right? Now, Google Maps gets better when more people use it, because if more people use it, Google Maps is able to use traffic data more accurately and is able to give you the right and the shortest paths to your destination. If there aren't as many users, then you don't get to have an improved product. Very simple. So a lot of technology, digital and internet products tend to get better as more users use it. And so, just inherently because of that, you have no other option but to have monopolistic or duopolistic leaders. Just look at how much better Reels or TikTok are because of usage. The algorithm gets better, more creators are on the platform, therefore, you're able to serve more interesting content, which people are essentially hooked to. So, there is no way to essentially break this down. There is a way that lawmakers are exploring, which is what in case derivative data, that means not primary data around users, but derived data is made more openly available for people to then build better products. The answer to that is there's a possibility. We just haven't seen a business in the last 40 years that has been built on the back of derivative data, barring one, by the way, which is again not derivative data, but derivative framework, which is how OpenAI even came into existence. OpenAI is worth 150 odd billion, I mean, more than 150 odd billion dollars at the moment, only because they used a
Yeah.
core engine called TensorFlow, which was an open source project that came out of Google. But do keep in mind
Yeah.
that they did not have derivative data to use. They had to actually scrape that off the internet, build their own data sets, and then make essentially a better model. So I haven't seen anywhere in the last 40 or 50 years where you can force a company to give up their most valuable resource, which is either primary data or derivative data of users. Even if it does come to that where you're going to be arm twisted to give derivative data, I think the quality of data is going to be so poor that it's not going to be that great for a new innovator to come into the space.
True, true. It's the millions of real users that actually, pump the mechanism of a, product. The way ChatGPT got millions of users in the very first month, that led ChatGPT being the better version because it could pump out more realistic responses compared to, let's say, Gemini.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Upward
yeah, yeah.
and downward, right? Very simple. How do you get people to upward and downward? The more people were able to upward, you knew that you were happy with the answers, and the more people downvoted, you knew that you could do better. And so the models obviously evolved. So I've always said that the problem with technology and internet companies at large is the fact that users also
Right.
are a part of the product. And so how do you then
Right.
dismantle that from the experience?
And talking about brands trying to harness AI, now it's like AI is literally everywhere, and I feel brands who are not really educated about AI are trying to use it in a manner that's not actually optimal. On the other hand, there are brands really using AI in an amazing way. So can you like brief me about what you feel should be the right approach for brands to approach AI at this moment?
Yeah, I think that's a very loaded question. Brands have so many layers, right? At its core layer, they continues to be a product or a service. That's the core of a brand. A brand cannot exist without having any kind of meaningful value addition to its
Right.
end consumer, correct? But then after that, there is a layer of meaning. And that's where the brand is developed. It's in this fuzzy space between functional and emotional is where
Right.
brands get developed. And the fact is that brands are developed as a sum of interactions. Very simple. That's my model, which is brand development is a series or a sum of interactions that you've had with a brand. And the fact is that a lot of brand managers try to focus on only one side of the equation, which is how do I get the user to buy? I feel that that's only
Right.
one third of the equation. The fact is that there are two other parts to it. One is how do you get the users to buy? And I think there is obscene amount of focus on that side of it, which is the pre-purchase. But I think purchase and usage is the other third of it. And lastly, what do you do post-purchase and how do you build an experience post-purchase is the final third. And I think you have AI, which has the ability to influence all the three parts. And while we see a lot of content getting generated on the pre-purchase models, how do I make interesting content? How do I make new ads? How do I make new banner content? How do I impress them on creating a whole new, user interface on my website? How do I build better apps, especially well-designed apps? While it can influence all of that, I think the wins and what's going to differentiate a good brand from an average brand or a great brand from a good brand is the focus on the other two
Right.
one thirds, which is how does the purchase experience look like, and how do you use AI to create a
Right.
post-purchase experience? I think that's also where Gen AI can essentially shine because you have the ability to customize and personalize at scale. and not from a content perspective, mind you, but essentially from an experience perspective, right? So I'll tell you something
Right.
extremely simple. Just take about 10 years back, and let's say you had a Wi Fi issue at home. You would have to call the
Yeah.
call center at Airtel. They would have to send a technician down. Somebody would have to troubleshoot it. You try and do that right now through the Airtel app on just your home Wi Fi. It's able to reset both at the end of the switch box, at the server end, as well as it's able to restart the modem itself. Now, that's really interesting because you're able to then build an experience which troubleshoots across the three stages of a Wi Fi connection and resets the connection where at least 90% of the problem statement is gets solved. Now, it could be that 10% of the use cases goes beyond these three stages, in which case you will call the technician in, but 9 out of 10 times you've solved it remotely, done obviously through technology. And just imagine how you can amplify that and create these wonderful experiences for people. By the way, this instance just happened to me a few days back. It just struck me how you're able to troubleshoot completely from the cloud, which wasn't even
Right.
existing about 14
True.
years back.
Yeah, because across the brand touch points, I think people or brands are focusing more on the content creation bit or the first stage itself. But the whole brand experience funnel is like an extensive funnel wherein AI can be used intelligently. Talking about AI campaigns, so like on top of my mind, I remember these Cadbury campaigns, using AI to, ad lib different names, using AI, and people found it fascinating. These are just a few, top level use cases that people know about. Can you tell me some interesting stories of AI driven campaigns that you have closely observed?
So I think one of the things I've had the ability to see is look at the breadcrumbs of zero party or first party data and completely personalizing the landing page itself, not just with name, but based
Oh.
on past behavior. Like, for instance, if you're trying to buy a car and you notice that you spent more time browsing the red color of the car, when you came back to the website, the banner itself shifted to a red color, right? Because it showed that there was a little bit of lag time that you spent additional trying to, you found the red color of the car interesting. And so why not just give you that experience when you came back to the website? I think this is just another addition to it. The third is, in a way, using music as a way to not just sense mood, but also deliver on that mood in a very customized manner. So I've seen websites which have the ability to actually change the music tracks, which are highly personalized and customized. Of course, they're not borrowing from a Spotify library, but they're generating music on the fly based on what time of day the user is accessing or based on the kind of interest categories that the user is essentially browsing. I think you have the ability to do all of that at scale now with generative AI, and that I find fascinating. So anywhere where you have the ability to customize and personalize, I think generative AI is just a given to begin with. I think it's something where you have the ability to obviously do that at scale, so use that tool as it were. But I think one thing that I'm seeing being very useful, where generative AI has the ability to take the conversation further. When you're able to tap subsequent series of insights after every interaction touch point, then the connection gets deeper. We're still in early stages of prototyping it, but the intent is when you ask a simple question or when you make the interaction through which you have a response, how do you then get more relevant insight and then deliver not just on how the interface looks, but how the user journey itself shifts? And I think that's where the power of generative AI will get leveraged in the next 2 to 3 years.
Right, right. Talking about going a step beyond generative AI, when we talk about these LLMs, large models, and brands trying to use it to the full extent, do you think private sector is far beyond public sector or the government in terms of dealing with AI or taking it seriously?
But that's been the case for the last 200, 300 years. The reason we've created corporations is largely because of speed. Governments have their limitations. They have to have a larger consensus. Private organizations don't. You don't need to have consensus. You just need 1,000 paying customers. Governments can't operate at the scale of just creating a service for 1,000 paying customers. So, in that sense, corporations and private enterprise will continue to lead as they have in anything in the sphere of innovation and R&D for the last 250, 300 odd years. The fact is that governments need to be clear that there are right incentives for private enterprise to flourish, but at the same time disincentivize any kind of a gap that we create between the haves and the have-nots, right? So in that sense, the job of government is to ensure that there is more democratization of what's getting created, and you're not creating a subcommunity of super elites versus leaving the rest behind. And at least in places like China and India, I have to say that the governments have done a fantastic job. If you look at technology infrastructure like UPI, ONDC, it's democratizing the usage across all spectrums and all communities. And there isn't one private enterprise that then has the ability to take the lead or create a long tail effect where the super elites consume more than 50% of what's needed. Of course, China has gone in the different direction. In the case of India, it's public infrastructure that's owned by the public to a large extent. In China, the same thing exists, but it's private enterprise in a way backdoored by the Communist Party in
Right.
China. So if you look at WeChat, it's obviously a private
Yeah.
enterprise, but they operate within the strong rules and bounds that the government has created for them.
Right. Indian companies have that freedom to express and create in a way that truly is revolutionizing the landscape, which I think, yeah, of course, China doesn't at the moment. And talking about lawmakers interfering with, AI products or the way AI is operating. So Elon Musk, interestingly, asked for a pause on AI development in 2023, but has gone on to develop his own AI. Like, what are your views about controlling or regulating AI?
You can't, right? Because there are three levels at which this competition can take place. It can take place at an enterprise level, that's one. It can take place at a capital level. That means how capital is getting allocated to new technologies like this, right? So, and then the third and the most important one, it can take place at a country level. So now, if you've seen, let's just take the classic example of video generative AI, right? We had Runway ML, we had
Yeah.
Sora, which OpenAI was trying to create. It's still not completely public because of limitations on their hardware. But then here comes a Chinese startup called Kling, and they are far superior to what was generally available on the web at that given point in time. Of course, others are catching up, but that's where it gets interesting. You can kind of arm twist at a organization or company level. You can arm twist at a capital level. You can even go ahead and say you can't put money behind AI or generative AI projects. But how will you arm twist at a country level? You can't.
Right.
So technology can never be constrained,
True.
especially when you have a fragmented world. You simply can't do it, and you shouldn't do it. Because if you did it, then you would have a 2 or 3 year lag in innovation, and it's impossible to catch up. Look at what's happening with EU laws. I mean, I really feel sad for my friends in EU because they don't have access to the best of models when it comes to generative AI. Just look at how we in India sometimes feel out of place of the kind of innovation that's taking place in TikTok in other markets, especially when it comes to social media
Yeah.
selling and social sales. And we don't have the ability to access those tools because we were completely out of the TikTok
Right.
ecosystem, right? Imagine how creators feel when you don't have the ability to actually influence through the TikTok algorithm, which would have extended their audience. So that continues to be every time you try and stifle innovation, innovation will find a way. So the job for lawmakers is to first understand innovation and most importantly, try and find competing frameworks or platforms for them to organize this innovation under. Don't stifle it, create frameworks and boundaries and bounds within which it has to work, but those boundaries has to be wide enough, which is in competition with the
Right.
world, right? It cannot be completely strongly bounded. At the same time, it shouldn't be unbounded. Now, do keep in mind that a lot of private companies are already applying these bounds. If you look at a lot of image generation models, they're ensuring that you're not able to create pornographic or adult images. They're, making sure that they're being responsible. But that's the edge at which government also needs to operate and also enforce those laws.
Right. Right. Talking about controlling or regulating technology on its own or in its complete scenario, AI has led to a lot of personalization, detailed personalization when it comes to the complete branding cycle. And the general public is, generally concerned about whether I am being listened to, whether I am being manipulated to, a particular, brand experience or a brand funnel or a buying journey. Do you think AI is truly democratizing it, or is it really exploiting the patterns and the data to drive consumption in ways never seen before?
Okay, that's a interesting question, but I'm going to take the word manipulate and change that. I think it's an
Yeah, yeah,
extremely extreme word, for the lack of a better term. So I'd rather change that to perspective. I think we have always bought into perspectives, and people have always been selling
right.
perspectives, right? Or conveying perspectives. Now, what we're doing currently is also an exchange
Yeah,
of perspectives. You have a perspective and a view of the world. I may have a slightly different perspective and view of the world. And my job is to try and convince you on
yeah,
my perspective. I don't see this as manipulation. I see this as expansion
yeah,
of thinking. Now, the job of Gen AI obviously is to do both. It's to give you the ability to expand your thinking, but also narrow it for an ulterior purpose of a sale or consumption or engagement or whatever, right? I feel that the cat is out of the bag. There is the infinite loop, which is how do I engage the user through consumption of content and therefore get them to buy? So that loop, unfortunately, has created excessive content where we're
yeah,
addicted to content and we're essentially working at a human chemical level to give us extreme dopamine shots so that people remain hooked. Uh, well, while that's sad, I think lawmakers are stepping in to make sure that there are some bounds put in place. Let's look at the bounds that are being put in place, which is ensuring that there's no social media access to children below 12. How do you protect girl children, especially because they're highly more prone to the negatives of social media as opposed to the positives of social media? So I think there are bounds being put in place, though I think it should have happened sooner. And I think we'll go through the same cycle with generative AI as well. But the thing is that with generative AI, the cycle will be faster in the sense that you have the ability to know what the pitfalls are and the negatives are. And I have a feeling that generative AI will also have the ability to self correct. Like right now, the social media algorithms are tuned in such a way that they're optimizing for engagement and
yeah,
time spent, correct? Now imagine I, as a user, brought a generative AI layer, which just made sure that it slowed it down or did that from a different point of view. So that means it chose the
right,
stories differently. So that means I'm running my own generative AI bot, which then picks it based on
right.
my parameters. So I have a feeling that generative AI is the answer for generative AI's own pitfalls. It's as
True.
broad as that. Now the question is, how do you then bring scale to that, and how do you then, ensure that more people adopt it? I think that we'll have to see how that pans out. What are the kind of organizations and companies and products that are built around it? But the almost always, if water cuts rock, the solution to that is also still water. So in the same sense, when a technology has some kind of downsides to it, you'll have to adopt the technology or adapt the technology to bring the upsides a little bit, to the top.
Right. And AI is, having a kind of a domino effect in terms of impacting other industries. And I remember reading one of your LinkedIn posts where you spoke about companies buying GPUs on a big scale. And more than buying GPUs, it's about the head count that's coming along with it. That's the real impact more than just the hardware. So, talking about that format wherein the talent is becoming a bigger element than the hardware or the actual technology, how do you see AI seeping into marketing roles or branding roles as well?
Yes, I think there are two ways to interpret what I've written on LinkedIn, but I'd like to give my interpretation of what I wanted to convey. At its core, I was saying that if you notice at one end, Google and Meta and Microsoft are laying
Yeah,
people off. So the human headcount is coming down, but they still need to deliver, correct? So what are you amping up? You're now amping up artificial,
AI talent.
intelligence.
Yeah,
Very simple. So while there is human intelligence that's coming down because you've essentially laid off some talent, you've brought some rationalization, but in commensurate mode, artificial intelligence has been added through compute. The cost of an NVIDIA GPU at this point is close to anywhere between $25,000 to $40,000. $25,000 is the listed price. $40,000 is the
Yeah.
optimized price if we want it to be delivered soon. Just three of those chips become the cost of an average employee salary in the US. 25,000 into three, $75,000. That's essentially the cost of an average employee in the US, which means that when you're at one end, you're trying to reduce headcount and human intelligence, and you're trying to increase compute count and improve artificial intelligence. So, in a way, it's compensating. And my argument is that some of this talent is already getting replaced by GPUs. So human intelligence is getting replaced by
Right.
GPUs. And when you see the model that way, then you start to realize what its larger impact is going to be. We're always going to need more humans for
Right.
work. Sorry, let me rephrase that. We're always going to need humans to do the end
Yeah.
outcome. We just unfortunately will need lesser and
Yeah.
lesser. Let's take two economies in farming. Look at the number of people employed in farming in the US versus the number of people employed in farming in India, right? Per
Yeah.
hectare. You will notice that India is at least 4 to 6 fold
Yeah.
higher, which means that we're not productive, whereas in the US is productive. But then the question you have to ask is how is
Yeah.
US more productive? It's only because they use machinery, which is physical labor got replaced with
Yeah.
machines. So, in a very similar manner, logic or human intelligent labor, not all of it, but most of it can get replaced with AI. Now, obviously, big companies cannot come and say this out in the open, but that's the way you will see a large part of this pan out in some form or fashion.
Right, right. I remember reading this quote. We want AI to do the hard work and not, for it to write poetry and do the stuff that humans love to do. So, like, how do you see the use of AI? Like, are people just fascinated by it, or is AI really going to replace the soft skill roles as well?
All right. So, in my journey on discovering deeper insights from AI, I have to say that nothing that I write on LinkedIn has been developed by AI. AI doesn't even give me the starting point.
Yeah.
Correct? I don't even use AI to craft the language. I don't use it to write posts. I don't even get ideas from AI. But the fact is that a lot of people, when you have to create average output, you can rely on AI,
Yeah.
and sometimes that is the job. I would use AI to respond to an email, correct? But I wouldn't probably use AI to do what I call as insightful work or insightful thinking, where I'm trying to rely on my brain. So while my LinkedIn post may not be written by AI, my WhatsApp
Yeah.
messages might be,
Yeah.
correct? Now, that brings us on to only two things that you have to keep in mind. Is AI helping you build on your ideas? That means you're using AI as a springboard, or are you trying to beat AI? Very simple,
Yeah.
correct? Both people who use AI for both of this, either as a springboard to make something that AI generated better, okay, and or automatically from scratch train themselves to be better than the output that AI is creating, I think will always continue to have a
True.
future. So anybody who is complaining that I don't want AI to do the creative job, see them as competition and see how you have the ability to beat
Right.
it. Because the competition
True.
exists. You are not going to sit down and replace it easily. See how you can better it.
Right.
The other thing that we have to keep in mind is I think over, let's just say 20 or 30 messages or over 20 or 30 pieces of content, we as humans will develop the ability to know what's coming from a cookie cutter
Yeah.
mechanism and what's coming from the ingenuity of a
True.
human. Not in the one, two, or three pieces of content, but over a long period, over 30 or 40 pieces of content, you'll have the ability to
Yeah.
judge that, right? And you will know how to gravitate towards more original creators. By the way, there will be no original creators left because they will all use AI in some form or fashion, but there will be more originality coming from the creators. I think people will gradually gravitate towards those kind of creators to a large part. But I do feel that there is still a market for what is AI assisted or predominantly AI created. We're seeing that with synthetic influencers. I have a feeling there is a market for that. It needs to pan itself out at some point. But at its core, there will always be value for 1% thinkers, 1% creators, 1% doers. Your job is to strive to be in that 1%.
True. True. But isn't it a bit alarming that the majority of the market or the talent out there is scared of what AI is producing? Is it like an indicator of uh, the mediocre level work that is being produced on a daily basis, or like what do you think is going to be the transformational future for the mid-level talent who are certainly going to be equivalent to what the AI is spitting out?
This is like saying manual draftsmen were scared of DTP computing, correct? Desktop publishing. It's like the manual draftsman versus when Adobe Suite came in. It was replacing manual draft work, right? Very simple. That's what it did. It replaced manual draft work. Uh, I'm not as concerned about the automation of some of these tasks as much as I am concerned about the written word and what's written in it. So people who focus too much on not the craft, but on the system, I can imagine why they're concerned, right? Because a large part of it can be automated. The people who are focused on crafting better outcomes, crafting better output, crafting and creating and refining what's essentially coming out, I think they will see them as a tool. So I see most people who are getting worried or concerned fall into two camps. The first camp who are seeing most of their automation work getting replaced and who believe that that's their
Right.
work, right? Then the second people who don't, they're the uninitiated. They don't know how to use it to its maximum potential. And I prefer that we focus on the latter group and give them not just the tools, but the training needed for AI. So I have to tell you, the biggest stumbling block for AI right now is its usage and how to use it. People are learning this off of LinkedIn posts and Instagram and YouTube videos and everything else. There is no structured way on how you can use AI to actually create better.
Right.
And that's where a large part of my focus has been in organizations. So whether it's within my organization or the larger part of the holding company, the focus has always been on not just the implementation of tools. I think that's the easy part. And it's extremely easy to do that. It takes you 15 days to do it. But it's about how to use these tools better. And that for me is a journey. And it's a journey which is different from the IT era, largely because in the case of the IT era, I could train you on Photoshop or Premiere or After Effects or Java or C++, and the output was
Yeah.
deterministic. That means the output was very
Yeah.
clear. What you trained, what you inputted got you a very specific output. But with AI, the problem is that the output is non-deterministic or probabilistic. Then how do you do training, learning, and constant or continuous learning in a probabilistic output world is what we need to actually build the human intelligence upon. If we are not able to bring people back, my thesis is that at the rate at which AI is changing, we need to change the way we use these AI
Yeah.
tools as well. So, before our world was very simple, we did K 12, which was we went 14 years to school, another 4 years in university, 2 years in postgrad. So, totally, we spent about 18 years of life. And after that, we thought we were work ready. And we thought that we were work ready for at least another 30, 40 years. I have a feeling that it's going to shift to such an extent that every 3 months, you will have to do a deep dive of 1 week in resetting your learning. So, which means that you've got 1 month dedicated every year, distributed over every quarter, where you're resetting or updating your learning. And that is the way I'm modeling and thinking about the future. And that's exactly the way I'm trying to inculcate that into my 4-year-old daughter as well.
Talking about AI taking over almost everything, do you feel there's sort of a mini bubble building up for AI based startups, which is ultimately going to burst and then the market gets corrected to what's actually genuine?
Yeah, it's bound to happen. It has to happen. Experiments have to take place. We have to have early experiments that crash early as well. And then we start to see some clear winners. I think all of these are theses that are getting worked on. I don't see them as startups. I see them as theories and thesis that's being put on forth. And the market is going to decide which thesis works and which doesn't, because that's the best way to check a thesis, right? Put that through a product or through a service, see if there is stickiness and it works or not, whether it flows to the top. If it flows to the top, then you win. If it sinks, it sinks. I think we have the ability to do that fast. So the intent is the bubble will burst and it should
True.
burst, right? Because when the bubble bursts, then you know what sinks and what floats to the top. And we want to only scrape from the top, right? So if anything, we need to accelerate the growth of the bubble and the
Yeah.
burst of the bubble, as opposed to trying to give artificial way to, keep it afloat, whereas we knew that it was going to sink all along. So I would say accelerate the bubble because the bubble is going to happen. It's just a question of how quickly can we accelerate it and then see which ones are going to sink and which ones are going to
Right,
survive.
right. Yeah, it's like truly, implementing the mantra, build fast, fail fast. So, we know what's working and what's not. And this was not something that we could imagine 10 years back. So let's say uh, in 2014.
By the way, that mantra, right? I like to change that a little bit, which is build good, fail good. The reason is that when you build something which is really needed by users, and you know that it doesn't scale beyond a particular point in time, when you fail good, you
Yeah.
learn from those mistakes. When you fail fast, you generally don't learn much, correct? Because you built it in such a small, in a very jugadu manner that there isn't much learning when you
True.
fail fast as well. So I always say build good, fail good. Fail good has learnings. Build good is when you're actually working on really creating a good product or service, which is a real need or requirement from users at
True,
this
true.
point.
And when it comes to building products, the current set of stack of technologies and the tools that we have at our disposal, it's enabling literally everyone or anyone to build whatever they want without having the hardcore knowledge required. This is something that we could not have imagined, let's say in 2014. 2014 was, just starting to set in with, still internet companies being the, roar out there, and we trying to still settle in with this 3G, 4G coming in at a slow pace. And cut to 2024, things are moving at a rapid pace. So let's say, if you had a crystal ball and you were to make a prediction about what 2034 would look like, what would be your prediction? What would we see around us?
I think we're going too far. The fact is that if you look at acceleration for a very large part, we've had exponential growth because of three primary technologies. The first primary technology is that we were able to double the processing power every 18 odd months, called Moore's Law. The second was, I think, at a span of about 9 to 12 months, you were able to double the capacity storage, correct? Which means that you could store more given the same surface area. Then the third technology was that we were able to double bandwidth speeds, which means how you're transferring data, okay, again, at a space of anywhere between 12 to 15 months. Now, the fact is, all of this, the Kreider's law and so on and so forth, but all of this at its core meant that we were focusing on speed of bit processing and bit storage and bit translation. That means moving it over a pipe. We have now struck a whole new oil well, all right, with the ability to make processing a little bit more efficient, correct? That means the speed of processing itself is changing. But the fact is, AI is not about speed. Unlike the previous technologies, like I said, where the output was deterministic, when we processed bits, we knew what we were going to get. When
Yeah.
we sent bits over a pipeline with high speed, we knew we were going to get those bits. When we stored bits, we knew what we were storing. But Gen AI, unfortunately, this is not going to be the way. There is no predictability on what the output is going to look like.
Yeah.
It's a series of probabilistic outcomes.
True.
When it's a series of probabilistic outcomes, the model that I prefer to use is the Brownian movement, which is it's a series of randoms. When it's a series of randoms, then it's way more difficult to predict how 2034 is going to be as compared to even 5 years hence, right? That means what does 2029 look like? But there is one thing that's very clear, and this has been the law for the last 2000 years. People who control resources will always win. And to a large extent, that resources have been of only two kinds. Either it's been capital, right, which is money, or it has been talent.
Yeah.
Very simple, right? So if you're able to control these two, you will continue to win. You look at how US as a country continues to attract the best of talent, which is why they continue to have the cutting edge in R&D, because the world's think tank and the world's best thinkers and talent always move to the US.
Right.
right? Because of better life, the quality of life improves and so on and so forth. So, what they're doing is they're controlling talent,
True.
correct? So, whoever controls capital and talent will continue to win. Now, so far, we're seeing those early shoots. Capital is easy to allocate. You can actually put dollars and cents to something, but how do you attract talent becomes a little bit of a tricky equation. So let's look at the latest news from OpenAI. They have no dearth of capital, right? Whatever number of billions of dollars they ask for, they get allocated that amount of money. But they seem to have an erosion of talent. You've seen all of the top people essentially move out of OpenAI.
Yeah.
So the win is who can control both talent and capital. That is very difficult to predict because with OpenAI's talent actually moving away, what does OpenAI look like 3 years from now? Where does the OpenAI and this kind of think tank move to? What are they creating? So it's very difficult to connect these dots moving forward. I think we can only connect it in 2034.
True, true. And talking about driving this kind of change on an organizational level, as the Chief Digital Officer at DDB Mudra, what strategies are you working on from the AI angle? Some interesting strategies that we could look up to.
Okay, so the first rule is very simple, do no harm. The intent of using AI tools is that we protect our clients. That's extremely important. So, which means that at an Omnicom level, we've got sandboxes where we're ensuring that anything that's proprietary data of the client or any kind of proprietary insights or learning of the client is not used to train the model again. So that means we have enterprise level contracts with frontier models where we can use the data without exposing clients' data. So, like I said, do no harm first. That means we're ensuring that data protection is at the core of our AI framework. And that's not going to change because we're eventually operators on behalf of the client. So, if anything, we need to take even more special care to ensure that we protect the data, keep that secure, and there is no way that data is being used to train these frontier models to begin. So that's step number one. Step number two, given this framework, which are the best frontier models that we can use, and how do we bring that into an easy interface so that anyone can use it, right? So we've got a product called Omni Assist, where you have the ability to use LLM models, GAN models, video generation models within a very simple interface where anybody in the organization can essentially use it. Now, we've covered these two important bases. The third base, which is going to be my key focus in the next 15 to 18 months, is how best to use these tools. I've noticed that even in the tool era, which is using Photoshop or using After Effects, I don't think we've been able to use these tools to its fullest capacity and potential. I think there needs to be a structure and bring that in. So to that effect, at an Omnicom level, as a part of OAG, which is Omnicom Advertising Group in India, I run a session called 1%, which happens 3 days a week on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. It's just a 10-minute intervention at 12:45 to 12:55, where most people who are able to attend essentially join. Usually it's in multiples of hundreds who are able to join, and they're able to essentially learn what's the latest and how it's actionable immediately. I think a lot of times the kind of content that you consume on YouTube is not actionable enough.
True.
And our intent is to not just deliver on the learning, but also make it immediately actionable. So, 3 sessions a week, 10 minutes, and that's the continuous learning model that we're focusing on. And I think that's yielding fantastic results already. And of course, then you have deep dives and workshops that you do every quarter on how to refine the way you would use these AI tools and use them to their fullest potential. Because I've always maintained that who's going to kill you is not AI, but a human who uses the AI better. So the intent is to create humans who use AI better. So it's a combination of human and artificial intelligence that will give us the cutting edge as opposed to most other organizations
True.
there.
It's a human intelligence that wields the tool. So if you're good
Yeah,
at it,
it's about the how. It's about the
yeah,
how. How are you going to use the AI
true.
and are you using it to its fullest potential? I think that's what is going to differentiate us from others in the space.
Okay. So, lots of young people in the brand and advertising space look up to you, look at your legendary career, and are inspired by it. What would be your advice for people watching this podcast?
I don't know how many people look up to me. I'll take that with a fistful of salt. But let's just say if you want to grow your career, focus on building a user experience. and not user experience as used by the UI, sphere, but literally, how do you get people to shape their thinking? How do you get them to feel in a particular way? And how do you get them to do an action? So, in the larger brandscape, I prefer to use the think, feel, do model as opposed to any other framework in brand building. Everything is essentially a brand. Influencers are now a brand.
Yeah.
Communities are a brand. Like I said, individuals are a brand. Companies are a brand. Products are a brand. Organizations are a brand. Now, how do you find a distinction is going to be key.
True.
Distinction ensures that you're irreplaceable, obviously, right? But that's just one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is how do you make sure that your irreplaceability has relevance in consumption? How do you bring that perspective to people so that your irreplaceable output's perspective is valued by the larger audience? And you could start with something as small as just 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. The future is a much fatter long tail. And how do you then have a stake in the long tail? Because trying to aim at hits is not necessarily going to pan out. Then how do you ensure that you have a long stay in the long tail? I was just watching an interview from a community built startup, and I was fascinated by the journey. They had a very simple takeaway. They said that when we looked at our website graph, it was essentially a flat line for 5 years. And this was even at a point in time where they were generating more than 100 articles, sorry, more than 300 articles a year.
Oh.
Even after generating 300 pieces of content a year, their growth is flatline, and then there was an exponential curve. As with all things in life, there are only two things that are going to yield you an outcome, which is delivered focus. That means you're focusing on what you're doing over and over again so that you get deeper and better at it, and also consistency.
True.
If you're able to hold consistency, you get better wins. One of the biggest challenges that I've seen with the young people is that they're falling for the quick, rich schemes. Or let's just change the terminology to quick outcome hacks.
Right.
That's not going to yield you any results, right?
Yeah.
These schemes are only just that. They're schemes. They're not rooted in fundamental levels. What you see as content online is a survivor bias. It's people who have won by fluke or with a huge amount of luck on their side who are talking about how they won. There is nothing to learn from this. The only learning that you're going to get is from doing, by acting, and then making your own mistakes and drilling your own oil well. You may get oil at, some people get oil at 20 feet, some people have to dig 200 feet, but you have to dig. If you don't dig and you keep and if it's like that old saying, right? I dug 120 feet, holes, except I found water 200 feet down.
Ah.
So dig deep, right? Don't dig 120 feet wells. Dig 200 feet well. And that's where you will start to get your wins. So focus and consistency, along with bringing perspective to what you're doing, is the way you would essentially survive in the modern world.
Words to live by, words to work with, certainly. Talking about a line or a motto that drives you personally, what would you say would be your one sentence motivation on a daily basis?
So I say that, the world has tremendous knowledge. We have infinite amount of wisdom. So the way I prefer to rephrase that in context is very simple. Everything that has to be said has been said. It just hasn't found relevance in your life as yet. What I mean by that is that you have this infinite wisdom and knowledge. You just need to find the ones that are so relevant that it leads you to action. And relevance is what matters. So strive to find what is relevant to you in your life, and whatever is relevant is going to help you achieve your goal. Because if you continue to focus on that one single prism of relevance linking it to goal, then nothing is unstoppable.
Cool. Preetham, I enjoyed listening to you. I loved interacting with you. And it was a great, insightful session for me personally. And I'm sure our viewers are going to love this. And thank you so much for your time, Preetham. I know you pulled out like this big chunk of time for this session, and thank you for this.
No, thank you so much, Rishabh. It was wonderful talking to you. I love the fact that it wasn't just about marketing or digital or technology. It was about just life in general. And I think that's where we find ourselves again as humans. We're at crossroads where we have this really powerful technology that's going to influence our lives in such myriad ways that we need to work through this together, and we need to just do more action than a lot of thinking. So I'm hoping that anybody who watches this is inspired to take action as opposed to just taking this as input or knowledge and then not acting upon it. I'd rather that you just take one piece and act upon it than just see it as a knowledge bank that's getting added to your brain.
True, indeed. Thank you, Preetham.
Thank you again, Rishabh.